fake it to Blunt. Brady tosses. Touchdown! Martellus Bennett.
Hello and welcome to another CSD Fantasy YouTube video. Today I will project Martellus Bennett's fantasy points for 2017. In previous videos I have looked at fits for different free agents and kind of left it there with a yes or no answer. But today I will take it even further. After analyzing Bennett's and the Packers' receiving and touchdown patterns, I will use a formula to project how many points Bennett can expect to produce next year depending on how many targets he'll see. So let's dig in.
Left goes back right over the middle end zone, touchdown.
Bennett's receiving patterns. We will be looking at his targets, yards per reception, and his catch rate in my usual 6 zones. So first let's look at his targets. What we can see here is that he does not see a lot of targets to the deeper zones, while he sees more than a third to both the short right and the short left. I will later use these patterns to project his yards for the season, but first we need the 2 other metrics. Yards per reception over the last 3 years have been distributed this way. It is no surprise that he does not gain as many yards per reception to the short sides, since he sees so many targets there, while the deeper zones should see more yards. By just catching the ball, he gains at least 15 yards. His catch rate might be my favorite metric of these 3. I just love seeing a spike somewhere where a player don't see that many targets. For instance, Bennett only sees 2% of his targets deep over the middle, but he catches 71% of those balls and gains 22.4 yards per catch there. I really enjoy finding nuggets like this since it's so far above his average catch rate of 63%.
Brady to the end zone in traffic in a battle for the ball. Won by Bennett. Touchdown, New England.
Lastly, for Bennett, let's look at how he performs in the red zone and if he produces any touchdowns from passes thrown deep. In the red zone, Bennett is extremely efficient when passes are thrown to the right. He scores a touchdown on half of the targets in that zone, which is amazing. For Bennett owners, I hope the Packers throw a lot to the right in the end zone. But as a Cowboys fan, I really hope they don't. I will not discuss too much about the deep throws because we have more interesting things to get to. What I wanted to show you, since this is part of the fantasy points projection formula I will use later, even though its impact is minimal compared to the red zone metric.
Free play. Rodgers. Touchdown.
So focusing on how Green Bay has treated their number 1 tight end over the last years will give us 2 metrics: percentage of targets per zone and red zone targets. These 2 are key in calculating Bennett's projected yards and touchdowns for 2017. And looking at the targets, we can see that it's the same as Bennett, with over a third that goes either to the short right or the short left, while the deep middle sees the least amount of targets. The numbers for the deeper zones will be part of both the yards and the deep throw touchdown calculations that I will get to in a minute. But before that, let's look at his red zone targets. And unfortunately, the Packers focus more on the left side when throwing to the tight end number 1 in the red zone with 47%. It's not too bad with 30%, but seeing as they only had 9 targets for their number 1 tight end last year, that would be 3 targets. That's at least 1 touchdown for Bennett. And if he only sees 1 more target in that zone, his number suggests that he could see 2 touchdowns on just 4 throws to that zone. So now let's go to the projections.
26 yards on that one to Cook from the 3. Play action. Rodgers to his right, wide open, touchdown. And it's Cook who got him down there.
Putting it all together, we can project Bennett's fantasy points for the upcoming season depending on his targets. I made 5 different projections with 5 different amounts of targets with 2 stats and 2 scoring options. The projections will be yards and touchdowns, with the points measured for standard and PPR. The first projection is for 47 targets. That is the same amount as Richard Rodgers had last year. And I know he wasn't the tight end number 1 last year, but he was the year before, so I felt that 47 target was a good place to start. And as you can see, Bennett would get 355 yards with 2 touchdowns, 45.2 fantasy points in standard, and 81.6 in PPR. Secondly, we have 51 targets, which is the amount of targets Cooks got last year. So looking at the difference between 47 and 51, we see that it wasn't a clear tight end number 1 last year, which is also why I did both the projections. You can also see that there isn't that big of a difference from 47 targets to 51. Thirdly is 73 targets, and that is the same amount that Bennett had when he played for the Patriots in 2016. That is a pretty big improvement with 500 yards compared to the 300s before and 2 more touchdowns, and he would land on 80 and 136 fantasy points in standard and PPR. In 2015, Richard Rodgers saw 85 targets, so I also did it for that if we look at it as the Packers only had 1 clear tight end in 2015, and that would be even more points for Bennett. Of course, more targets, more points, more opportunity. And lastly, I have for 75 targets. I know that's less than 85, but this is all of Cook's target, and since he's gone, Bennett gets all of them, and I gave him half of Rodgers' targets from last year because I felt that he would steal targets from Rodgers as a clear tight end number 1. And this will land him at 76 fantasy points and a tight end number 16 finish last year. Not too great, but with the previous projection of 85 targets, he would have finished tight end number 10. It's pretty decent. Not in 10-team leagues, but still. So as a conclusion, I don't trust Bennett in the Packers scheme, and I will not spend a decent draft pick on him, even though he will play with the King of the North. I also want to take the opportunity to ask you how many targets you think Martellus Bennett will see next year, and where do you see him finishing within the tight end spectrum. So please comment below or hit me up on Twitter with your thoughts.
3rd down. Cutler for Martellus Bennett, and it is a touchdown!
Thank you very much for watching. Please leave a thumbs up and subscribe. Everything is very much appreciated. You can check out Instagram and Twitter for more charts and numbers with links in the bio. You can go to csdfantasy.com for more fantasy numbers, such as Eddie Lacy and the Seahawks. And as always, the spreadsheets are dark and full of terror.